So you mentioned to me the book, The 100-Year Marathon by Michael Pillsbury, when we discussed China. And I've gotten a chance to read parts of it. And I'd highly recommend people read it because there's a few, it's definitely an eye-opening perspective. I don't know if I agree with all of it. I don't know if you agree with all of it, but it certainly it gives a very intense perspective on China. And you said it was instructive to how Donald Trump thought about China. Can you describe the main thesis of the book and maybe with a hopeful view, how it's possible to have a trajectory of these two superpowers working together in the 21st century versus fighting against each other?
Perfect. So it's a very, very big book, and I think it's a book definitely worth reading. Michael is tremendous. He speaks fluent Mandarin, and so he spent a lot of time researching to do the book. So I highly recommend it to everyone. And it was considered more of a fringe perspective in 2016, but it really, I think, came to represent the underpinning of what the collective thought was of the Trump administration. And maybe you could argue that it was even more cynical. The whole thesis of the book was that China from 1949 to 2049 was working to reclaim their position as the global leader, right? So you had the Chinese Empire. One of the things, I don't know if it's from this book or a different book that I read that spoke about how in the late 1700s, basically the emperor of China was offered some of the industrial capability from England, which was basically now becoming the Industrial Revolution, and basically said, no, we're fine. We're the great Chinese Empire. We don't need any of these things. We're better than that. And by rejecting that, the rest of the world got stronger. China remained weaker. Then you had the opium wars. The Chinese had big opium problems through all the trade back and forth. And then China from about 1840 to 1940 had 100 years where they really, after all these treaties, were really a second-class country. And so then you have the People's Revolution that comes in, and he talks about how China, very strategically, as a very, very poor country, would fight their way back and build brick by brick. And, he proffers in the book that Nixon didn't go to China and open China. It was China that actually went to Nixon and was able to use Nixon in order to open up. And then they talk about how under Carter, they were able to get the U.S. to contribute to a lot of they were able to kind of start borrowing the U.S. know-how from our university systems, from our medical, from our science, from our research. And the whole notion that was the conventional thinking of American leaders was that the more we helped China advance, the more they would become a free market economy, and it was a great market. The only difference was that they weren't allowing us access. They were making our companies basically give them all of their technical knowledge. They were stealing our intellectual property. They were doing espionage to steal a lot of the patents. They were just ignoring our patents, and they weren't following any of the rules of international trade. Then they started becoming the world's manufacturing hub. They basically became the world's factory. And then they started this whole initiative called the Belt and Road Initiative in order to start locking in their lines of trade. So they were buying up all the ports everywhere. They were building railways, thinking, how do we lock in our distribution so that we can maintain the dominance as the world's global factory? And so it was a brilliant long-term plan that they were doing. And by raising awareness, by putting the tariffs, Trump slowed them down a lot. The real question is if they actually did achieve this full objective of becoming the world dominant country, what they would have done with it, whether they would have been nefarious or not. I think from my perspective, even with some of the divisions and issues we have now in America, I still would rather an American-led world order than a Chinese-led world order. But the notion is that they were playing a very zero-sum game and really going to be the dominant leader in this new world order. So that really framed the perspective. And it wasn't necessarily, people ask me and the Chinese were always fearing, is Trump trying to stop our rise, right? And you have a great book also by Graham Allison that he writes about, are we destined for war between the US and China? And he goes through different historical times where you have a power and a rising superpower. And I think, more than half the time it ends up leading to war. So the question is what's going to happen here? And I do think that Trump's perspective, and this is my interpretation, because everything was always tactical day to day. And, he was unpredictable to the Chinese, which they couldn't deal with. And he was unpredictable even to his team sometimes because he was playing it day by day and issue by issue and always changing and adjusting, which is how an entrepreneur thinks. He respected the job they did by building their country. They moved 300 million people out of poverty into the middle class. They did it at the expense of a lot of other countries throughout the world, especially America. But Trump says, look, stupid politicians made deals. I respect China for doing what they did. But what I want to do is I want to change the paradigm so that for the next 20 years, we can maintain our advantage over them. We can maintain our competitive dynamic. And his general view was that America is the best private sector in the world. We have a lot of the best minds in the world. And if we can just have a level playing field with set rules, then America should be able to outperform. And so that's really what we were trying to do. We were trying to kind of get rid of some of their state subsidies, make them follow some of these international rules of trade, and not allowing them to do predatory investments that then undercut different industries that we had, so that they can have global market dominance or monopolies on different industries, and then have pricing power, but also geopolitical power. So like one of the examples that people talk about now is China for the last 20 years was very advanced on seeing this electrification trend. They subsidized solar panels. A lot of the American solar panel players were put out of business. So now I think it's like 90+% of solar panels in the world are manufactured in China. And then all the rare earths that you need in order to make these solar panels and to make these electric vehicles, China's bought up most of them and a lot of the refining capacities in China. So thinking through strategically, how do we create an even playing field so that we're not at the mercy of them, and how you can have a rules-based world order, that was really kind of the thought of what we were trying to work towards.